Good evening to each and every one of you. It seemed weird to drive to church on Wednesday night and be able to see what was happening in front of you. It's been dark for so many months, but now it's a little lighter, a little more visible, and better that way, I think, at least on the evenings. Tonight, we are going to be basing out of John, the second chapter. And we'll be in a few different places as well, a few things to discuss along the way tonight. But John chapter 2 is a good place for you to at least turn and start within your Bible. We talked last week, we set the stage for what we plan to discuss, and that is the miracles. We set the stage, I guess you would say, last week. We talked about what three terms were often used as synonyms maybe for miracles in the Bible. What were some terms? If you were here, you'll know it. If you weren't here, you might still know it anyway. But do you remember? Signs, wonders. Remember what the other one was? It was the other one's miracles. Sorry, I guess it's not a synonym if it's the actual word. As soon as I asked that, I thought, I don't think that's right. I think it's miracles and signs and wonders were the others. But I thought I'd let y'all, dangle on the line just a little bit there beforehand. But anyway, we did talk about that. We talked also about how that our discussion, we're going to go through each of these miracles that are recorded in the Bible. I think there are 34, I believe, that are at least we're going to look at. But we'll talk about all of these. And our goal here is to not necessarily figure out the sort of metaphysical explanation of why something happened, but rather to look at what was the purpose of this miracle. And we talked about last week how that the role of miracles or the purpose of miracles was to do what? Confirm the word, to convince people who needed a little convincing. What other purpose did miracles play? Yeah, to sort of develop or to help grow the faith of people as well. So if you want to think about belief, to establish belief or to further grow faith, any of those ways to describe that works as well. Yes. Sure. Right. 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 And so tonight we're going to talk about the first one, which I'm assuming that most of us will have at least some passing familiarity with. You'll see this called the marriage of Cana. You'll see it called the wedding at Cana. You'll see it called water to wine. Any of those terms works. In fact, in my Bible, in John chapter 2, it says water to wine. But the book that I'm using for this is called The Marriage of Cana. But when you look it up online, the thing that pops up seems like is The Wedding at Cana. So you get a little bit of all of this. But I'm going to go through a few of these things here to start with. We're going to read from John chapter 2 in just a moment after that. But the beginning of Jesus' miracles occur apparently 3 days after Philip and Nathaniel, who's Bartholomew, depending on which book you're reading from, become his disciples. And Josh, you read that just a moment ago, and the question is presented there in John. He said, "We have found who we're looking for," basically. And what was the response? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? So almost from the get-go, what is the impression of Jesus for a lot of people? There's a doubt and a skepticism that exists almost from the get-go. And so this is where we see it begin. And Jesus and his disciples, there were 5 that had been called earlier in John chapter 1, were invited guests to this wedding at Cana in Galilee. According to what we're going to read here in just a few moments, Mary, the mother of Jesus, was also present. And we don't see Joseph mentioned here, and I didn't really dive into this too much, but it would appear that we never see Joseph mentioned at any time in Jesus' ministry, which probably makes you think that he would have been, most people think that he's probably dead at this point. If Jesus' ministry starts when he's roughly 30 years old, then the assumption here is that Joseph would have probably been somewhere between 50 and 60 at that time. And that's an extended life for somebody in the time period. But you mentioned just a second ago that this time period, that this area, these people that they would have seen would have known each other. Galilee is a small region, I guess, all things considered. And so it would not have been at all surprising that there would be a wedding and that people would go to this wedding and would know who's at this wedding. How many of you we've all been to a wedding before, right? We've all been, to 2 hours. How many of you are hoping to never go to another wedding again? That's mine. I'm going to raise both hands if need be on that one. But this wedding, the way weddings were at the time, we're going to see a little bit about that as well. This is an idea of where we are on this. This is the Sea of Galilee. It may not do a lot for you, but this area of Galilee is where we're going to talk about. And blow it up just a little bit. You can see then where Cana is on the map here of Galilee. And so this area, these are places that should look familiar to you as somebody who's read about in the Bible, places like Nazareth. What do we know about Nazareth? What is Nazareth? Yeah. And so if you look at the map, like Nazareth and Cana are very close together. I mean, I look at this as a Lancaster Stanford or a Stanford Crab Orchard kind of place, and think about how many people that you know in the next town over. So they would have been familiar in this area, in and around the Sea of Galilee. If we go a little further then, from what I'd seen, from what I looked at, and I will not at all claim to be any kind of genius when it comes to Jewish marriages. If there's anything I know less about is marriages, and Jewish marriages will be even less. But there appears to be two stages to this type of marriage. The first was the term a betrothal. That's the word that's used to describe Mary and Joseph in the Bible, which is a promise, but not so much the promise like we think of. Like if I were to tell you, I promise I'll be at your house at 8 o'clock, what's binding me to that? Not really, my word. And if I don't show up at 8, you might think a little less of me if I promised I'm going to be there. But I don't really have anything that says I have to be there. But it's also a type of binding agreement. Now, if you have a contract signed with an employee or with a worker that says that they're going to be at your house to put the new shutters on or to put in the new the countertops or whatever, and they're going to be there tomorrow at 8 and they're not there, that's a little different, right? There's a contract that may take money off of that. Or they may not be allowed to do that if that be the case. Well, this is sort of a binding agreement here. So it's a betrothal. We might use the word engagement, but it's a little bit more legally binding than what we think about today. Josh. Hey, Ben, you got anything on that? I don't know that it was every marriage ever would have been arranged, but the idea of an arranged marriage, we sometimes get into sort of an Indian type thing, but arranged marriage sort of existed everywhere until about the last 100 years or so, because you were, one family with somebody would marry another. Right. 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 Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, so in many ways, you look at what we've got up here, the betrothed couple not lived together, but they were considered in many ways legally married. And a little bit more so than what we would think of today. Breaking the agreement, like Ben said a minute ago, required what was called a bill of divorcement. And unfaithfulness was considered adultery in this, and that was a reason that could cause at the end as well. Now, that's the first stage. So that's sort of the prep stage. The second stage is the ceremonial stage, which we are much more familiar with. The idea of somebody getting engaged today to be married doesn't really involve us much. We might say good or we're happy or whatever. But then the next question is, we'll say, when's the wedding, right? And then they'll tell you when the date is. Well, that's where this is. This is the second stage, the ceremony that involved, is what we got right up here, bringing home the bride, as it were. From what I was reading here, the bridegroom, the groom's friends escorted the bride and her attendants from the bride's home to the home of the groom. Now, this story will make a little bit more sense if you remember the story of the 5 wise and the 5 foolish virgins, right? And so in the story of the 5 wise and the 5 foolish virgins, Jesus tells this parable. What was Jesus telling what was the purpose of the 5 wise and the 5 foolish virgin story? To be ready, because 5 of them had their candles, they were ready, and what the other 5 had to do? They had to go buy the oil. They had to go buy it. And when the bridegroom showed up, what happened? They missed the way. Well, that story makes sense when you read something like this. The procession would usually occur at night, and as it moved through the streets of the city, and you can imagine this as well, onlookers would shout congratulations, celebrate. It was sort of part of it. Do we have anything like this today? What is ours when go through the streets or walk through and people celebrate? Yeah, absolutely. As you're walking out of the church, out of the building or whatever, people throw things. It's weird that we throw things at people as they get married, right? It's just throwing. Golly. No wonder every one of y'all is 75 years old or so daggone nosy. You've been nosy your whole life. That's how it is. I'm going to ride with them all the way out to the Holiday Inn. Why did they pick this place? Let's go somewhere else. I'm going to need you to repeat every part of that. Put them in a tub and parade them around the house. What does that mean? Chivalry, like. All right, hold on. There is a clear divide in the congregation right now. Do what? All right. Well, we try not to get too involved in cultural issues, but we might need to tonight. I tell you what, this is chivalry is what she's saying. My goodness. All right. So, I tell you, none of this was planned. This is not on the lesson plan. It went for something to do. That's further proving my point about the being nosy. So, yeah. What a bunch of jerks. That's just stupid. Stop. All right. We got to go on. All right. This may be what we preach Sunday. I've got my Sunday morning lesson ready, but I'm not real thrilled with it. We may have to throw this in here to spice it up a little bit. That's what we'll parade around banging pots and pans all around the church. As the wedding, the marriage supper that falls, sounds quite familiar. What we do at a wedding doesn't, the arrangement's a little different, but even what Lucille's talking about is not that uncommon to what we even think about today. Festivities continued for an extended period, often up to a week, with the bride and groom treated royally. And as you can see, there's songs sung, speeches made, elaborate feasts prepared. All of that still exists, even in weddings, even today. There's a picture. There's several Marriage of Cana pictures. This is an older one here, obviously from 1305, hanging in Padua, Italy. So if you ever get over to there, you can see this. I guess it's not hanging, it's a fresco, so it's painted on a wall instead. So let's go to John chapter 2. And we're going to read, first of all, the story. I'll ask you a few questions about it, and then we're going to look at what do I need to take from this? Why does this matter? What's my goal to learn from this here today? And Ed, do you care to read John chapter 2, verses 1 through 5? All right. And so let's go a little further then. Verses 6 through 11 is a little smaller. And so we might need to go from your own Bible in case. But Mom, do you care to read that one? John 2, 6 through 11. All right, so we're going to talk about some of these things here to start with. So to start with, first question, we already know the answer, but we just saw it in the reading as well. Where does this happen? Where was this wedding? Cana of Galilee. And we said, and we saw on the map there just a moment ago, it was right next to Nazareth. So this is a question that will purely be speculative. But why do you think it started here? Why do you think the first miracle happened here? Okay. Close to the hometown. Like you said there a minute ago, these are people that would have been, everybody there probably knows each other, at least in passing in this situation. Any other thoughts why it might have been here? It was a joyous occasion. This is not if they had ran out of wine and all they had left was water and nothing else happened, it really wouldn't have affected much of anything one way or the other, right? Because nobody was hurt in this situation. Nobody was injured. Nobody was dead. So you start with something that, sort of benefits everybody, maybe in this sense. This is not raising somebody up out of the grave. Ben, what were you going to say? I'm sorry. Right. Sort of a almost history repeating itself, kind of a thing. Right. 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 Sure. So we talk about then in the reading there, those first couple of verses, who are names of people or who were people that were mentioned that were at this? Okay, Jesus, his disciples, his mother. And so all these people that will play a really big role going forward, this is the kind of the first time that they're all really together, right? They've been called in. Jesus has been calling them. He's appeared to them, talked to them, asked them to follow, to leave what they've had behind. But this is kind of the first public setting, I guess, that we'll see a lot of these folks. What did Jesus's mother say to him in verse 3? That's what Ben was kind of getting at there a little bit. They have no wine. You can see the kind of the concern here, the things that moms see that maybe not everybody else sees. Right? I can imagine. I don't know if you noticed this or not. We may or we may not have, but mom immediately sees, and she tells him. Right? She tells him they have no wine. Now, how does? Yeah, absolutely. Sure. So how then does Jesus reply? Go to verse 4 there and see. Maybe don't read this in the Old King James Version, but give me a He said, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." So it gets a little frosty with mom right there, right? It gets a little upset. Why do you think he said this? That's not our problem, which tells you the difference in how different people sort of view things. Mom said they are out of wine, and you can almost see like the concern, like this is going to be bad. And then in that translation right there, it's like that's not my problem. But some of us would look at it the same way. Yeah, and absolutely. And so he then responds in this way, says, "Not my time has not yet come." Now, this is one of a handful of times that we do see Jesus say things that we would probably describe, I don't know if you would call it cryptic, maybe sort of prophetic as a sense. Remember when Jesus said, "Don't you know I must be about my Father's business?" But that sentence didn't really make sense to the people that heard it. Do you think Jesus's response, especially the second part here, when he says that, the second part where he says, "My hour has not yet come," do you think she knew what that meant? I think it seemed like that Jesus would say something sort of oddly cryptic, like everybody may not get this. It would say something like, kept these things in her heart, right? It's like she sort of recognized there's something here, right? Right. 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 I think that's what the question is. Yeah. So we go ahead. Yeah. What did his mom? What did Jesus' mother then tell the servants? Yeah. Right. Sure. Every now and then we need a little bit of a kick or a push, right? And sometimes when we were younger, it was whatever it might have been. It might have been, a career choice that we were thinking about. It might have been a ball game or something like that. And sometimes you just need that little pep talk, that little sort of, it's almost like a smack on the backside, but it's more of a little shove on the backside. Maybe you do need to get out there and do that. And that could be the case. Right. Right. Let's go a little further. How many water pots do we see that there were here in this story? There were 6 water pots. How many firkins? Well, I had that. So a firkin from the King James is variously described as 8 to 12 gallons. All right, 8 to 12 gallons. Water pots, therefore, would hold approximately 20 to 30 gallons each. Well, think about how big that would be. Think about trying to hold 20 gallons of milk or something like that, like how heavy something like that would be, or water if you've ever carried a tub of water or something like that. And so these were large. This was not a little cup of water that could be, a fluke kind of. I know that's not the right word, but this is a large amount that they are working with. Certainly. You couldn't bring a gallon of, you can't have 1 gallon sitting there and say that'll cover the task. It's going to go on for a long time. So how does Jesus then instruct the servants? Fill the pots with water all the way to the top. And so there's 6 of them, 25 gallons, whatever. We're looking 150 gallons. This is a lot of water that he's talking about right here. He says, fill them all to the top and then do what? Give some to the master of the, he said, draw some out, take a little bit, and then give it to the master of the feast, the person that's sort of running the show, as it were. What did the ruler taste? And it's funny the way that he reacts to this, right? He reacts when he tastes this, because then the second thing, what comment does he then make in verse 10? And you can imagine everybody's going to be there to start with, but jobs and other things are going to pull them away, and the crowd's probably going to lose some people along the way. And you're exactly right there. Once they're not really worried about what they're drinking, or maybe they're not there any longer, they're not going to have as much worry about it. But they've kind of flipped it on itself right here. He says, you've brought out the good, the best. Sure. Right. Sure. Now, the question then here at the end, because this sort of, it's 11 verses here, and that's pretty much it. So what does this miracle show here? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. What else do we see? I said that a minute ago. If they had ran out of wine at this wedding, it probably wouldn't have been the end of the world, but there would have been people, and there would have been the bride and groom that would have said, well, I wish we hadn't, we should have ordered more. I knew we should have, you can see those kind of thoughts. But like you said, something kind of trivial, something that didn't really matter that much, he still took care of it. Right. Right. So that's the thing. I had that's written down second here on my paper, is that it caused the disciples as much as anything to believe in him. And that was really the group that had to be convinced. If that's the right word, it may not be, but that's the group that had to be convinced first, right? You had to have the people who are going to go out with you. If they're not buying in, it's going to be really hard for the next wave of people to buy in. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Sure. Absolutely. So, what do we want to take with us? What do we want to leave with? Well, I've got 3 things that I want us to sort of go home with here this evening. First of all, kind of what Josh was saying there just a second ago, but Jesus can provide all that we need. Now, that does not necessarily mean provide all that we ask for. Why is there a difference in need and ask? Ask is a want, right? And if you give, if you let a kid sit on Santa's lap and ask, how long will they stay? They'll talk forever, right? I want a little bit of everything, right? Do they really want it, or is it just you just get so wrapped up? Well, I saw this, or my buddy's got that. Well, but we do have Jesus can provide our needs for us. And what are those? What is providing for our needs? How does that help us? Mhm. But on the flip side, if we're not careful, I got the job because I'm pretty good, right? We can fall into those sort of traps really well. Well, I'm the best, blah blah blah, whatever it is. And you're exactly right. Like we should focus on this as more of a humility type thing. That like we've been provided an opportunity, perhaps as it were. First John chapter 4 and verse 15, we read what that, and this is the confidence that we have toward Him. Do we know how the rest of this goes? That if we ask anything according to His will, He what? Hears. Now, grants? Not necessarily, because the mall Santa hears everything that the kid says, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that you get everything that you want. But we know that we can ask that God will hear from us. The key, though, is how we ask, right? How should we ask? Humbly, with the right motives, not demanding. As your will, thy will. We go through Jesus to ask God. Number 2, stop focusing on the wine. I'll think about this for just a second. When he's asked by his mother to do something about it, Jesus said what? What did Jesus say to his mother when she asked him to deal with this? What does this have to do with me? This is how does this affect me? Now, one part of this story, maybe a sad part of the story, is that the bride and groom, people at the wedding, Mom, you kind of talked about this a little bit, never really got to know the winemaker, if we want to use that, right? Because they were too focused on the wine. All they knew is, boy, they brought some really good stuff out here, but maybe didn't know what was the provider there as well. Do we ever do that as well? Do we ever get focused on the stuff rather than the provider of that as well? So I'll ask that question for the second one. What is your wine? I use the word wine in quotation marks there because we can get sort of wrapped up in the wine and forget about the winemaker, as it were, right? We can sort of think about this thing, whatever it might be. It might be that job that we want, right? We've all had that job that we sort of desired. And one of the things that happens sometimes is you get that job and it maybe wasn't what it was cracked up to be, right? It wasn't maybe what we wanted. Maybe, it might be a new house or a new car or something. You ever bought a car? Somebody in here has probably bought a car that was a lemon. You ever bought something that just wasn't very good? Well, you spent a lot of time worrying and thinking and saving to buy that, only to be sort of disappointed in the end, right? We can get kind of caught up in that as well. But whatever our wine is, if we say that, we can't let that take our eyes off of Jesus. The third one, we need to believe in the messenger just as much as the message. The purpose of this is made clear in John chapter 2 and verse 11. It said, this is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. The goal was to make people believe in him. Okay? Make people believe in him, because you can't do anything else if they don't believe in the person that is actually doing what he is. Jesus didn't want his followers to believe in this stuff. Signs, wonders, and miracles. Why do we not need to believe in signs, wonders, and miracles? When I say not believe in them, why do we not need to be so captivated into those kinds of things? They were temporary. How many people that Jesus healed lived forever? None of them. They were healed from their injuries or from their illnesses or whatever, but they still got sick or had other things. The goal of the miracle was to do what? Confirm the gospel right there. Uh-huh. If we're not careful, the miracles become the stuff that we want to have, right? And that if you're not careful with that. Yeah, sure. Mhm. Right. We don't see that. So the point is not the message, although the message is important, but the point is more the messenger. And that's where our faith and our belief should be in more than anything of all. So, questions before we wrap up? Absolutely. And we struggle, right? Because we want usually everything that we want or need or whatever word you want to say, we kind of want it right now. Actually, we wanted it a few minutes ago. We'll take it now if we have to. But that works. That his ways are not our ways, and his time is not necessarily our time as well. Yeah. Yes. Right. Good point as well. Any others? Any other thoughts? Thank you so much. Do what? I know. As I looked at it today.